I've been a truck driver for years and have been through some tough situations, but that night was different. I was driving down a rural highway, one of those roads that cuts through the middle of nowhere, with almost no traffic. It was late, the sky was completely dark, and the radio wasn't helping keep my mind occupied. Just the sound of the tires on the pavement and the headlights cutting through the darkness. I was alone as always. When I saw the figure by the side of the road, I didn't think twice. I was used to seeing hitchhikers, especially on isolated roads like this. But as I got closer, something sent a chill down my spine. The person stood still, wearing strange, tattered clothes. They didn't look like a lost trucker or someone in need of help. They were motionless, almost like a statue. And the worst part, they didn't react to my headlights. As I passed them, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw they were still there, unmoving, staring at me. But what truly sent a horrible feeling through me was the thought that, at that very moment, they were entering my truck, as if they had slipped through the walls without me noticing. I felt like something was wrong, but I didn't stop. Fear was creeping in, so I just kept driving. Still, the discomfort wouldn't fade. I kept checking my mirrors, and every time I did, I felt like something was there. Something inside the truck with me. I knew the doors were locked, but the feeling wouldn't leave. It was as if someone was behind me, but whenever I looked, there was nothing. The radio, which had been silent, suddenly started emitting faint sounds, almost like static. I wanted to believe it was just exhaustion and the solitude of the road, but I couldn't. Something was wrong, very wrong. I tried convincing myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe exhaustion. The empty road, the loneliness of hours driving with no one around. But the feeling that something, or someone, was in the truck wouldn't go away. Every time I looked in the mirror, the emptiness behind me felt even heavier. I could see the shadows inside the cabin, but I saw no one. Just silence, and that overwhelming sensation that I was no longer alone. With every mile I drove, the discomfort grew worse. The air inside the cabin felt thick, heavy, like I was being watched. That's when, in a moment of desperation, I decided to pull into a gas station, even though I didn't want to. I needed to get out of the truck, breathe, check my surroundings, anything to regain control. But as I stepped out and looked at the truck, for just a second, I swear I saw the shadow of a figure moving in the windows. But there was no one there, no one visible. The cabin was empty. I even looked under the truck, instinctively, but nothing. I got back inside and started the engine again, but I couldn't keep going. I just couldn't. I felt like something was following me, but I had no choice. I had to keep driving. It felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, unable to escape. And I no longer knew if it was paranoia or something real. But the feeling of being watched never left me. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The worst part was later, when I stopped at a bigger rest area and smelled something strange, something sweet and rotten at the same time, coming from the passenger seat. It was the same smell I noticed when I passed that figure on the road. My body froze. I knew something was wrong. I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. But with every passing second, the tension grew. The smell got stronger, like something was there with me, even though I couldn't see it. I checked the mirrors, looking for any sign of movement. But nothing. Then I started to hear a faint sound, almost imperceptible. A scratching noise, like something shifting behind me, on the passenger seat. I couldn't take it anymore. That sound seemed to be coming from inside the truck, but when I looked, there was nothing. That's when I felt pressure on my neck, a presence, right beside me. The passenger seat seemed to sink, as if someone had just sat down. I froze. The cabin was ice cold, and a wave of panic overtook me. I didn't know what to do. I knew that if I looked again, I would see something. But at the same time, I knew I didn't want to see whatever was there. I slammed my foot on the gas, trying to escape that feeling of being invaded somehow. The road felt endless. Finally, with the engine roaring and the headlights cutting through the night, I reached a point where the feeling of being followed started to fade, little by little. The noises stopped. The cold inside the cabin disappeared. The smell was gone. When I checked the rearview mirror one last time, nothing was there. But the fear never left me, and the unsettling feeling that something stayed with me in that truck has never gone away. I never knew if it was just paranoia or something more, but one thing is certain, I still can't forget that night. I never thought that a simple act of helping someone could disturb me so much, but what happened that night still haunts me. I was driving my truck on a deserted road, a stretch I knew well, but it always seemed scarier when I was alone. The sky was dark, the few road lights barely lit the way. Then I saw that man by the side of the road, waving. He looked lost, and I didn't hesitate to stop. He was too tall, skinny, and had a strange appearance. I didn't know if it was because of the tiredness or if his behavior was really off, but something about him made me uncomfortable. He got in without saying much, just murmuring a barely audible thank you. I tried to start a conversation, asking where he needed to go, but he only responded with short phrases, always avoiding looking at me. The worst part, however, wasn't his strange behavior, but the smell. It was strong, a mixture of rust and something that resembled rotten meat, almost unbearable. It bothered me so much that I could barely keep my focus on the road. What was he doing there on such a cold night, not saying much, and why was that smell so intense? I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. It was like that smell was impregnated in the air. I tried to focus on the road, but that strange feeling wouldn't go away. When I turned to ask again where he was going, a chill ran down my spine. The passenger seat was empty. He wasn't there anymore. I stopped the truck immediately, the brakes screeching in the silence of the deserted road. My heart raced. What was happening? Where had he gone? I had just looked at the seat, and he was there. I started looking around, but the road was empty. There was no sign of anyone. The smell lingered, still in the air, mixed with the scent of the inside of the truck. What scared me even more was the fact that there was no sound, no door opening, no footsteps. How had he left so quickly without me noticing? Panic started to take over. I looked down, and that's when I saw the footprints. Wet footprints. But how? He hadn't left through the door, and the truck had been stopped the whole time. The marks on the passenger side floor were clear, and they were wet, as if he had climbed out through the window, but he hadn't. I searched the inside of the truck as if I could find a logical explanation, but all I could feel was a lump in my throat. I didn't know what was happening. I just felt the fear grow with every passing second. I couldn't think clearly anymore. The footprints were there, as if they were watching me, challenging me to understand what was going on. I looked outside, expecting him to appear out of nowhere, but nothing. The road remained deserted. The trees on the sides looked more threatening than ever. I decided to get out of the truck, maybe to find some clue that would explain all of this. But when I closed the door and took my first step onto the road, the silence grew even heavier. I didn't hear a single sound. It was as if the world around me had frozen. I got back into the truck and, with my hands trembling, I accelerated without thinking. I just wanted to leave, get that road behind me, but as the truck moved forward, the smell of rotten meat was still there, almost unbearable. I no longer had control over what was happening. When I finally looked in the rearview mirror, I saw, for a brief second, a tall, skinny figure standing in the middle of the road, but it wasn't enough for me to see clearly. It was quick. I blinked, and when I looked again, it had disappeared. The most disturbing part? The wet footprints were still by the truck, proof that I wasn't crazy. That man had entered the truck, but then disappeared. I couldn't explain what happened that night. I couldn't talk to anyone about it, and even now, years later, I still wonder. Who was that man? What did he want? All I know is that, since that day, I've never driven on that road again. And if I could go back in time, I would have stayed with the feeling that I should never have stopped to help. It was an ordinary workday, driving on the highway I always travel. The weather was strange, with dark clouds rapidly forming on the horizon, but nothing that made me imagine what was about to happen. The road was deserted, with few people around, but something started to bother me when I began to notice other drivers waving and flashing their headlights. At first, I thought I was just on a busier road than usual, but what they were trying to communicate didn't seem trivial. I started to feel uncomfortable. They weren't just waving in a friendly way. There was panic in their gestures. That's when I stopped, my heart racing, and one of the drivers approached hastily. He seemed tense, and his voice was filled with fear. "There's something on the back of your truck," he said, pointing with wide eyes. "We can't identify what it is, but it's not human." I stood still for a moment, trying to process what he had just said. It couldn't be. What did he mean it wasn't human? I was as confused as I was scared, but I knew I had to get out and check what was happening. My body was tense, and each step toward the back of the truck felt heavier than the last. When I looked at the rear, I noticed deep marks on the body, as if something had scratched the metal with tremendous force. It wasn't something a person could have done, I knew that. I knew I wasn't prepared for whatever might come next. I crouched down to examine the marks, trying to understand what had caused them. The claws, deep and sharp, seemed to have been left by something large and strong, but what? No animal I knew could have done this. And as I got lost in my thoughts, We heard a noise coming from the forest beside the road. A low sound, almost a growl, but it wasn't like the sound of a dog or a wolf or a bear. It was something different, darker, heavier, as if it were the grunt of a creature larger than anything I'd ever heard. My stomach churned. The silence that followed was absolute, except for the sound of those trees swaying in the wind, as if the forest itself was waiting for something. That feeling of danger was becoming more palpable. The growl from the forest grew louder, lower, and more threatening, as if the creature, or whatever it was getting closer. I looked at the other drivers, who were becoming more agitated. They started revving their trucks, as if they were trying to flee, but what I felt was that no one knew what to do. I was paralyzed for a moment, unsure whether I should get in the truck and drive away, or if I should wait for some kind of response, some sign of what was happening. But the scratches on the back of the truck wouldn't leave my mind. They weren't natural. They didn't seem to be caused by anything I'd ever seen. The growl seemed closer now, and the silence that preceded it only increased the feeling that something was coming our way. It was as if the forest was alive, as if something huge was waiting to attack. I looked at the drivers one more time, and in an instinctive movement, I went back into the truck. I needed to get out of there as quickly as possible. The fear taking over me was so overwhelming that I could barely breathe. When I floored the truck and started moving, I looked in the rearview mirror and, for a brief moment, I thought I saw something moving between the trees. Something big, dark, but so fast I could barely identify it. Whatever it was following us. I accelerated as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest, my eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, but the sound of the growl continued to echo in my mind, even as I moved away from the forest. When I finally reached a more populated area, the noise ceased. The silence was absolute, but the fear didn't go away. I looked at the back of the truck, but the claw marks had vanished, as if they had never existed. I don't know what that was, or what it wanted from me. All I know is that, to this day, I can't explain what happened on that road. I can't deny what I felt, but I've never talked about it with anyone. I was left with the feeling that I was being watched, even though no one else saw what I saw. All I know is that, after that night, I never drove on that highway again.